English translation, 204th contact. Sunday, 22nd December 1985, 0408 hours.
Unfortunately, it took longer until my present visit because I was otherwise occupied and was also absent. Moreover, I also strove to investigate some events of the future with respect to terrorism, assassination attempts, and other acts of violence that will happen in the next 3 decades. But since it was determined that no more official statements are supposed to be made about this, I may only mention this for you alone.
I just asked you for the most important events.
That is of correctness, therefore, I also only strove for such. Yet officially, in accordance with Ptah's explanation, I may say the following. Everything on the earth will change in the coming time, through neo-Nazism and through religious fundamentalism and fanatical extremism, just as much as through many assassination attempts and acts of terrorism, which will assume forms that will surpass everything previously known in this regard to a very great extent. The world and the thoughts and actions of the humans will change radically and completely, and not only will the fanatical hatred and the just as fanatical vindictiveness of the individual terrorists, assassin, and users of violence, as well as the small and large terrorist organizations, play an extremely disgraceful and degrading role, but also the hatred, vindictiveness, lust for power, and world domination plans of the governments of various countries with their militaries and secret services. By the end of the second millennium, everything will take place relatively mildly in this regard. But after this, the time then begins, which will be full of tears and terror, especially in the world of the Christian, Jewish, and Islamic faiths.
Then we are really approaching very rosy times. But you can tell me about that later, when we have finished the official part of our conversation. So for now, I would like to address 2 things that concern myself. As you know, I had fallen ill to malaria on my travels to Africa and the Orient, as well as to the Middle East, and suffered some weak relapses over the years, after Asket had cured me of the illness. Such weak relapses still appear every now and then. But even though they are no longer bad, they are still very uncomfortable and even annoying. As a doctor, do you know what I can do about it?
You are not even willing to let us help you. But in this case, I think that you should accept our assistance. At least then you would be rid of these vile troubles for all time.
In this respect, it would be fine with me if you could do something. How should the whole thing proceed?
You would have to come with me into my flying apparatus then. I can free you from your suffering, after which you will have no more troubles in this respect for the rest of your life.
In contrast to a new or mechanical arm, I will gladly take your offer. We can go into your ship afterward, however, when we have finished our open discussion. Then I would now like to raise the second question. Since my collapse, I have gained quite a lot of body weight, namely 20 kilos during the first 2 months after my collapse. Since then, I have the greatest difficulties in decreasing or even presently holding to my weight of 90 kilos. I continuously starve my weight down, but as soon as I eat even just a normal serving, my weight shoots up immediately. How might this work?
You have to take many medicines, without which you can no longer live. These are what boost up your body weight.
You already said that once, which is why I also told this to my doctor. But he said that this was nonsense because medicines would have no such effect.
That is a nonsensical statement that attests to the fact that earthly medicine is still very backward in its insights and in its knowledge. The fact is and remains that medicines of various kinds contribute toward increasing the body weight. Nevertheless, it might still take a long time before the earthly medical profession investigates this fact, recognizes it, and then accepts it.
So it is not a possible gluttony that forces some people into obesity, but just medicines.
That cannot be generalized because many people fall into obesity because they know no boundaries with food. Therefore, they take in too much fatty food, which irresistibly increases their body weight. The resulting obesity in this form has nothing to do with that which is purely genetically conditioned.
Then there is also a genetically conditioned obesity? As far as I know, our medical science knows nothing about that.
That is of correctness, because this fact will first be recognized towards the end of this millennium, as well as other matters that are determined by the genes. Thus, for example, anxiety, sexual addiction, addiction to adrenaline rushes, addiction to extreme sports of every kind, addiction to the enthusiasm and fanaticism relating to the sporty or other achievements of other people, etc.
However, that will not please many people. Can they not defend themselves, then, against the effects of these certain genetic things?
That is absolutely in the realm of possibility if the person consciously and willingly concentrates on neutralizing, altering, or dissolving the genetic effects, which can usually be done in an easy wise by the fact that distance is taken and achieved from those things that are the reason for the enthusiasm or fanaticism. The best way to do this is through a healthy self-initiative, through which things are personally done, actions are accomplished, or businesses are conducted, and so on, which require one's own logical thinking as well as one's own motivations and strengths, whereby successes are produced. Thus, the effects of the genes are cancelled by this and can be changed for the better.
But on the other hand, earthly genetic researchers, etc., say that this is not possible.
That represents an erroneous assertion. At a later date, this statement of truth will have to have its rightful place, which will not be too far away, because the initial findings of relevant kinds will already disprove the old conventional and erroneous conclusions in a few years.
How is it then with carelessness and contempt for life, as this appears, for example, with extreme athletes?
That is also genetically conditioned.
Apparently, the brain acids are impaired by these genetic influences, and this then destructively spreads to the thoughts. Is that possible?
That is not only possible, but actually the case. Yet now, my friend, it's time again that we end our conversation. You look very worn out again. Then until the next visit, which will only be on the 3rd of February of next year.
As you wish. Then until we meet again, and give everyone my best regards.
But now, you should still come into my flying apparatus, so that I can free you from your suffering.
Oh yes, of course. Then let us go. But wait, I still have a question. My malaria dates back a long time ago, but I still have to struggle again and again with sporadic attacks. Is that normal?
Not really, for such a phenomenon only appears in the absence of complete healing, and this happened because a new infection was given when the rest of the healing process expired.
So that means that I was newly infected toward the end of the healing process, when Asket cured me. But how was that possible, since at that time I no longer resided in Africa but in India?
That is not surprising because the Anopheles maculopennis type of mosquito has already spread for a long time even in the Far and Near East, as well as in Western Asia and so on. Also in Europe, the insect has acclimated itself. Therefore, soon also in the northern regions of the planet, it will begin its spreading of malaria. This should last until about the turn of the millennium, before the first cases will occur.
However, the malarial mosquito, respectively the Anopheles maculopennis, is accustomed to a warm or even hot climate. How is it then that this beast suddenly also appears in cold Europe?
Due to the stupidity and negligence of the humans, who import from anywhere in the world, food and other commodities, in which insects as well as scorpions, spiders and snakes and other creatures are often contained, and these then become reintroduced via the imported goods and then slowly acclimate, mutate, and spread themselves.
The malarial mosquito is also called the fever mosquito, and mainly appears from April to October in a malaria-spreading form. It is about 6 to 8 mm long and is a so-called lip prober. Its wings are scaly, and its proboscis is, as far as I know, a little shorter than its entire body. The wings have small dark spots.
That is of correctness. This insect is a mosquito that appears in forests and in open areas rather frequently, but it is rarer than other mosquitoes, such as the Aedes sp. and the Culex pippins kinds. The Anopheles maculopennis is easily distinguished from other mosquitoes in its posture alone. It holds its body perfectly straight, but at an angle to the surface. The other mosquito species, however, bend their heads and proboscises at an angle from their bodies and, at the same time, somewhat parallel to the surface. Especially in warm or simply warmer countries, the genus Anopheles has a great importance as a carrier of malaria, as you know from personal experience. The malaria pathogens are tiny spore creatures that stay in the salivary gland of the Anopheles maculopennis. For infection, specific developmental stages of the pathogens are necessary. These are transferred from the mosquito's proboscis and from its saliva into the bloodstream of humans, after which they then initially settle in the liver. Then they attack the red blood cells and split every 1 to 3 days into new individuals who in turn attack new blood cells. Each time, a dangerous fever appears, which is well known to you. Also in Europe, malaria was formerly common, but then it largely disappeared. With the new invasions of the Anopheles maculopennis, however, it will happen that the illness becomes apparent once again, even if not to a great extent, at least not in the near future. What exactly arises from this, the time will prove.
And how is it with the larva?
It has no breathing tube. Floating immediately beneath the surface of the skin, it whirls with its mouthparts that exist as suspended particles to itself.
And to my knowledge, there are about 3 different forms or types of malaria, right?
That is of correctness. One is called malaria quartana, then malaria tertiana, and malaria tropica.
And by which of these 3 types was I attacked?
Fortunately, by malaria quartana, a form that has become rare, but through which you still have troubles to this very day. Since you were newly infected, before the healing process that Asket bestowed upon you was completed, the illness was able to survive. But now I will free you from this definitively. So come now.
I will. If you permit, then maybe later, I will still separately add an explanation of a competent form to your remarks, if I find one in a clever book.
That will be your concern. But now come.
Malaria ital. Mala area bad air, F. Collective term for infection by protozoa of the genus Plasmodium, transmitted by a mosquito Anopheles. To be distinguished are malaria tropica, caused by Plasmodium falciparum, malaria tertiana, caused by Plasmodium vivax or Plasmodium ovale, and malaria quartana, caused by Plasmodium malaria. Development cycle and transmission. See Plasmodia, distribution. Despite intensive control measures, malaria is now widespread worldwide in the tropics and partly also in the subtropics below 2,200 altitude. Every year, about 100 million human beings fall ill, and more than 1 million human beings die of malaria. The situation in many endemic areas is worsening due to the increasing resistance of Plasmodia to chemotherapeutic agents and of Anopheles mosquitoes to insecticides or due to inadequate general control measures. In Europe, increasing number of imported mosquitoes cf. Airport malaria, endemic occurrence in Europe in the Danube Delta and parts of Turkey. Clinical manifestation through the cyclical decay of erythrocytes infected with Plasmodia. The fever attack occurring in this process is repeated every third day in the case of M. tertiana, every fourth day in the case of M. quartana, and irregularly in the case of M. tropica. Double infestation with one type of Plasmodia at different times, or with different Plasmodia. Or with different Plasmodia species at the same time. Plasmodia at the same time leads to uncharacteristic fever rhythms. Fever rhythms cf. Quotidiana. The pathogenesis is possibly caused by metabolic products released, hemolytic anemia and hypoxia, as well as by the disease itself. Anemia and hypoxia, as well as autoimmune reactions of the host and capillary stasis. Clumping of affected erythrocytes. Diagnosis microscope. Detection of Plasmodia blood smear thick drop, especially at the beginning of the fever attack. Serodiagnosis IFT, CFT, only to confirm anamnestic findings. Indications of M. malaria mosquito, Anopheles. Malaria Plasmodia, FPL, C. Plasmodia. Malaria prophylaxis, F. Malaria prophylaxis. Measure to prevent malaria infection. Depending on the development of resistance of the Plasmodia in the individual regions and taking into account the contraindications, a regular intake of chloroquine, proguanil, and short-term mefloquine is necessary from 1 week before travel to 4 weeks after the last possible exposure incubation period. Current chemoprophylaxis. Additional measures to avoid mosquito bites exposure prophylaxis are mosquito nets, suitable clothing, insect repellents. Large-scale mosquito control with insecticides is made more difficult by the resistance of mosquitoes. Malaria quartana F, quartan malaria R. Plasmodium malariae, nowadays the rarest form of malaria. Incubation period 20-35 days. Symptoms: general onset prodromy, flare-ups, fever. Onset prodromy, fever attack every fourth day, every 72 hours, hepatosplenomegaly. Recrudescence still possible after years up to approx. 20 years after infection. In exceptional cases, even later. 4. Chloroquine, Complacer. Nephropathy, immune complex deposition in the kidney. Prognosis, relatively favorable, provided there is no kidney involvement. Unfavorable in the case of nephropathy. Malaria tertiana F, tertian malaria, Plasmodium vivax. Plasmodium oval. Incubation period usually 8 to 20 days. Symptoms: first 3-7 days, uncharacteristic. Initial fever, followed by fever attacks every 48 hours every third day, with 40-41 OC fever and chills. Relapses 8 months to 2 years, relatively frequent. Treatment: chloroquine. Elimination of exoerythrocytic parasite stages, hypnozoites, schizonts, in the liver by primaquine. Prognosis: without renewed infection, healing usually after 2 years. Not life-threatening. Malaria tropica F, English, Falciparum malaria, Air. Plasmodium falciparum, most severe form of malaria with acute danger to life. Incubation period usually 8-12-5-17 days, clit. Clinical, onset often very uncharacteristic, sudden high fever, chills, gastrointestinal complaints, vomiting, dizziness. Anemia and jaundice erythrocyte breakdown occur early, as do liver and spleen swelling. Often leads to death after a few days. If the disease is survived, there is no recurrence after approx. Months. Hyperparasitemia, 250,000 parasites ul blood. Hemoglobin batru point change memo mol I, thrombocytopenia, bilirubin, Shamsit umo-il, hypoglycemia, 2.2 mol-L, creatinine 265 umol-I, lactic acidosis there. Quinine, chloroquine, sulfadoxine pyrimethamine, sulfalan pyrimethamine, mefloquine and halofantrine against schizons, primaquine for elimination of gametocytes, in severe cases possibly exchange transfusion erythrocytes. Complications: gastrointestinal malaria can feign intestinal infections, cerebral malaria with hemorrhages and necrosis in the brain inf. Capillary stasis leads to various neurological disorders, for example paresis, epilepsies, meningoencephalitic pictures, coma, and death, depending on location and extent. Cardiac malaria with collapse and myocardial damage. As renal complications, immune complex glomerulonephritis. Consumption coagulopathy, thrombocytopenia, blackwater fever, intravascular hemolysis with following hemoglobinuria, often with lethal outcome anuria, coma, acidosis. Pschirembel Clinical Dictionary, 258th edition.